Christopher Weiss. I recently came across this Sea Org recruitment flyer, which briefly explains the Sea Org logo. The star above a laurel wreath, according to this flyer, is supposed to represent the Galactic Confederation, of which Earth was once part, along with the number of stars belonging to said Galactic Confederation. What would a pre-clear even know about the Galactic Confederation narrative? Isn't this a part of the OT3 materials? Okay, Chris, thanks for asking this question. And I'm just going to run with this now. I have threatened many times to go into Hubbard's literature and give it to you guys straight and just tell you some of the stuff that people are exposed to. And I've talked about the cosmology or mythology of Scientology and how it's kind of a disparate collection of various one-liners and stories Hubbard told over the years that we kind of merged and put together and figured out in our own heads as we went along as to what this picture really looked like. And the Xenu narrative, the OT3 story of the Galactic Genocide, is probably one of the more coherent story narratives within that broader collection of myths and one-liners and like I said, little stories and anecdotes that Hubbard would tell. So that's one reason why it gains traction. It's also confidential, so you don't get exposed to that Xenu stuff until you've paid an awful lot of money. And it's sensational. It sounds wild. It sounds insane, right? So people love talking about it, even though it's really only, a little tiny part of this bigger picture. So what else is in this bigger picture? Well, let me share some things with you because I thought you guys might find this interesting and maybe educational as far as what Scientology is all about. I mean, that Sea Org symbol, the wreath and the star and stuff, I mean, we used to take that stuff seriously. I thought that was, when I learned about that, I was like, oh, wow, that's really cool. That symbol means a lot more than I thought it did. And that's only the tip of the iceberg. So there's a dictionary in Scientology called the Technical Dictionary, which defines all of the technical stuff that's used in auditing or in training, different from the administrative words that Hubbard invented for running the organization. That's the administrative dictionary, and that's another whole book. The technical dictionary is basically just a collection of quotes and definitions that directly from Hubbard's works. So there is. And this is not confidential. This technical dictionary is any Scientologist can buy it. In fact, every Scientologist has to end up buying one. I think there's a newer dictionary now, or there will be one. But I don't know if this is still in use, but the quotes from it are, and the information in it has always been available to all Scientologists. So this is why I'm showing it to you. Galactic Confederacy is one of the terms defined in the technical dictionary. Okay, anybody has access to it. And the definition doesn't mention Xenu at all, of course. What it says is the former political unit of which the solar system was part. That's it. The Galactic Confederacy, the former political unit of which the solar system was a part. Obviously, he's referring to this solar system. And that comes from the L. Ron Hubbard definition notes. So when he was asked, what's a definition we can use for this? That's what he jotted down, and that's what's in the dictionary. So that's the exposure that people have to the Galactic Confederacy until they do the Xenu thing. But there's more. There's another term that is often bandied about when people start talking about the space incidents, the space drama or space opera or the past track or whole track. There's a lot of terms in Scientology for what happened before. And another term that gets thrown around is the Markab Confederacy, which is another name for the Galactic Confederacy in some places. I've heard other things about the Galactic Confederacy, but when I was coming along as a Scientologist and Sea Org member, I had the two things understood as the same or very, very similar. So let me read you the definition of the Markab Confederacy right out of the Tech Dictionary. And again, I'll remind you, it is available to every Scientologist at every level. The Markab Confederacy definition: various planets united into a very vast civilization which has come forward up through the last 200,000 years, is formed out of the fragments of earlier civilizations. In the last 10,000 years, they have gone on with a sort of decadent, kicked in the head civilization that contains automobiles, business suits, fedora hats, and telephones, spaceships. A civilization which looks almost exact duplicate, but is worse off than the current US civilization. And that's a definition from a lecture that Hubbard gave in August of 1963 at St. Hill in England. So, is it exactly the same thing as the Galactic Confederacy? Well, maybe, maybe not. Depends on which one you're talking about and when. So this is a pretty wild claim here that there is this confederacy of planets out there that are various planets, more than one planet, and they've got this kicked in the head civilization, and they've been going on for hundreds of thousands of years. So I used to read this stuff out of the tech dictionary and go, "Oh man, what else is there to know that he's not saying?" Right? Because all the OTs in my life, like my parents or other OTs I met, would hint. I think they kind of got off on it actually. Sometimes they would sort of hint up at, well, there's a lot more here than you think, and you'll learn about it when you're ready, when you get to the, to the confidential levels. Now, just for fun, again, because I've been threatening to do this forever and I'm finally doing it now, I thought you also might enjoy a couple other readings from the scriptures. And this goes back to 1952. This is out of a book called Scientology, A History of Man. And this little book is chock-a-block full of stuff like this. Now, this contains a chapter which talks about the principal incidents in our past, specific incidents on the theta line, it says. Now, the theta line meaning that a thetan, a spiritual entity, is, moving through time and space, and that's the theta line. And a thetan goes from one body to the next, but there are times when a thetan doesn't have a body at all. And there are times in the past where bodies have been very different than they are on Earth right now, or they were utilized in different ways. And sometimes they were used as little devices to be able to punish a person as a spiritual entity or a thetan, for example. So Hubbard talks about various incidents in the past, and one of them is the coffee grinder. He says here, and I'm just going to read this straight out of History of Man to you. The coffee grinder is leveled at the preclear, and a push-pull wave is played over him, first on his left side, then on his right, and back and forth from side to side, laying in a bone-deep somatic physical pain sensation, which cannot be run unless you recognize it as a vibration, not the solid board it seems to be. When this treatment is done, the preclear is dumped in scalding water, then immediately in ice water. Then the preclear is put in a chair and whirled around. He was quite swollen after the pummeling of the waves and was generally kept in a badly run but quite modern hospital for a few days. Sometimes he was given several treatments, and after the first one would report back on schedule for the next. And this coffee grinder is part of this other incident called Fac 1 or Facsimile 1. Facsimile in Scientology is a word that means a mental image picture, a thought, a memory. And Fac 1 is supposed to not be the very first picture you've ever had, but the first one that they came across where they had these implant type things going on. See, the coffee grinder is not something that happened to you yesterday. It's something that happened to you millions of years ago. Numerous times, happened over and over again. This is a way of controlling populations, see, and they mess up you, not your body. They take your body, but they mess you as a thetan up. They're trying to control you as a spiritual entity, see. So Fac 1, Hubbard says, was an outright control mechanism invented to cut down rebel raids on invader installations. Okay, so here you have invader forces, these races or species of creatures that would come and invade solar systems or planets and take over. And Earth was once caught up in wars between various invader forces. And so these mechanisms or these traps or implants were used kind of similar to how we might think government uses mind control now, through propaganda or, say MK Ultra, some of this, brainwashing, all that kind of stuff. Um, the idea here is that this is a, an earlier and much more powerful version of brainwashing that you would use on thetans, on spirits. And you would use it via their body or directly on the thetan if you had the right electronics to hit the thetan directly. So FAC1 was this control mechanism. And it was probably designed by the fourth invader, because there were Hubbard differentiated the invader forces by number. There was first, second, third, fourth, I think up to like seventh invader force. And he says it was probably designed by the fourth invader and used by him in its original state and ritual for a considerable time. It gave him a nice, non-combative, religiously insane community. Okay, so the idea was you would do this on a bunch of people, not just one, and you get this, religiously insane, but very chill, non-combative, rebel. These guys were rebelling against the invader force, and now they're all about, supporting the invader force, and they've been implanted with this coffee grinder and FAC1 stuff. So I thought you would find that interesting. And there's a lot more detail I could go into. Now, that's 1952 writing, okay? So that sounds pretty wild. You'll notice that Hubbard didn't actually assign dates specifically to the coffee grinder or FAC1 because he said they were used over and over again. And he didn't exactly lay out when precisely. So you could sort of, look for these incidents and find them in lots of different places, depending on how you answered the questions in your auditing sessions about when it happened. But then there in 1963, and I'll wrap up with this stuff, Hubbard had advanced his mythology or cosmology to now having very, very, very specific incidents of control that were placed on thetans that happened in very exact time periods or stretches of time. And for example, you have all of these were incidents that were designed to implant false goals or purposes in people so that they would, head off as a thetan to, solve crime or be a good guy or whatever the goal was that was being implanted in the person by the implant. Okay, and these are all different kinds of implants. And here's one, the gorilla goals. Okay, this given in an amusement park. Okay, so imagine trillions of years ago, somebody set up an amusement park type installation. Okay, that's literally what Hubbard is saying. This is not metaphorical. He's talking literally about what happened to us in our distant past. He says that there's this amusement park with a single tunnel, a roller coaster, and a Ferris wheel. And it was used between about 319 trillion years ago to about 256 trillion years ago. A long span, he says. Yeah, no shit, right? The symbol of a gorilla was always present in the place the goal was given. Sometimes a large gorilla, black, was seen elsewhere than the park. A mechanical or a live gorilla was always seen in the park. This activity was conducted by the hoi polloi, a group of operators in meat body societies. In other words, they had, like human-like meat bodies. He uses that to differentiate from robot bodies or android bodies or like Terminator bodies. Because Hubbard said in the past you had doll bodies. That's what he had. That's how he referred to them. But he was talking about androids or robots that thetans could occupy just as easily as they could occupy a meat body, see? And he says that this activity was a group of operators. They were typical carnival people. They let out concessions for these implant amusement parks. A pink striped white shirt with sleeve garters was the uniform of the hoi polloi. Such a figure often rode on the roller coaster cars. Monkeys were also used on the cars. Elephants sometimes formed part of the equipment. The hoi polloi, or gorilla goals, were laid in with fantastic motion. Blasts of raw electricity and explosions were both used to lay the items in. And he says here the series is always 5 goals. They're very simple goals, no long words. To end, to be dead, to be asleep, to be solid, to create, to find, to be visible, to be sexual, to be invisible, and a few more were used. Always 5 goals in a series. So I guess they would select from amongst that list of things. They also had to sleep, to be asleep. So these were goals that were implanted in people, okay? And this is why you now have obsessions about religion and sex and government and compliance and all this other stuff. Hubbard's explanations for that are that they all come from this. And this gorilla goals is just one of about 5 or 6 different sets of goals that he describes in this 1963 bulletin, which is not confidential. It's available to any Scientologist who wants to open up one of the technical volumes and read it. So, getting back to your wonderful question here, Chris, this is the sort of thing, what would a pre-clear even know about the Galactic Confederation narrative? Well, he wouldn't know anything about Xenu. In all the time that I was in Scientology, I never once heard the word Xenu uttered by L. Ron Hubbard or any other Scientologist because it's confidential. But I read all about gorilla goals and aircraft goals and bear goals and coffee grinders and FAC 1 and all kinds of other incidents, the boohoo and the weeper and the this and the that, in these various non-confidential materials, okay? And I would just eat this stuff up because I thought that it was all based on research Hubbard had done in auditing himself and auditing other people, so that this is the stuff they would describe in their auditing sessions, and Hubbard would take it as fact and just go, oh, okay, that's what happened. And then he would write this stuff up. And his method of auditing people always included leading questions. So he would lead them into these preformed ideas he had about what was going on. And then they would come up with and generate this stuff out of their imagination and out of his sort of prompting. And that's how he would come up with the stuff and claim that it was real and it was literal and it was true. So, okay, so there you go. So no, a Scientologist is not going to know about the Xenu narrative until he gets there, but he is going to know about all this other crazy stuff, and he's going to have it all flipping around in his head, wondering what's what. And that was me for many years while I was in Scientology. So, all right, threat has now been made real. I've now dived deep into some of the scriptures of Scientology for you, and I hope you found that interesting.